Welcome to Money Matters. This is DCrowell from Mortgage Network. In the next segment, I will be touching on national economic news and world economic news and how that affects our life here in Beaufort County, and hopefully make some sense of it all. This week has been a busy one in Washington. It's overpowered the performance of the markets. It's overpowered really any other news, any other economic news. Washington is center stage at the moment. This past week, the Trump White House proposed the outline of a reforming or reformation of the tax code. The bullet points, the major restructuring of the tax code would lead to a simplification of tax brackets to 35%, 20%, 15%. I don't remember them exactly, the top bracket being 35%, but a simplification down to 3 brackets from 7 brackets at the present time. The impact, the dollar impact, heavily favors upper-end taxpayers, and the major impact also in the restructuring of the taxes is that the business tax level would be reduced from 35% to 15%. Which is a massive reduction in business taxation. There is also a rumor, not on the tax restructuring sheet, that there will be a repatriation of funds held overseas, that businesses that have been, multinational corporations that have been earning profits and keeping them offshore, keeping them overseas in order not to be taxed here, would now be allowed to bring the money home with a flat tax on the returned money of 10%. So all of this is very, very interesting. Another major interesting element is that of interest locally here, since so many local businesses are privately held small companies. S corporations, partnerships, LLCs, all so-called flow-through companies, companies that issue K-1s, and that the K-1 income goes to the individual tax return. All of those companies would have the tax rate reduced from 39.6 to 15%. So that's a dramatic decrease. They would be included in the category of business tax rate reform. So the pass-through entities, which are really it's really a quasi-private part of a person's tax return. That profit has always been, in the past, taxed as personal income. It would now be at a much reduced rate of 15%. That is being heralded as a giant boon to small business people, and it certainly would be helpful in the mortgage banking community, because it would encourage small business people to declare more of their income in a straightforward manner, allowing it to drop to the bottom line, since it would only be taxed at the 15% level. However, partnerships, LLCs, and S corporations account for some of the very, very large businesses in the country, and the reduction of tax revenue would be enormous. Another sort of sidelight on this whole question of tax reform is what impact really would it have on the major corporations? In the Wall Street Journal this morning, today is the 28th of April, so in the Wall Street Journal this morning there was an interesting article of reporting, not of opinion, of fact-based reporting, that showed that the great many of the Fortune 500 companies already pay tax rates at the 15% level or lower. So the actual impact on U.S. corporations is, at least on the biggest of the corporations, the 500 largest companies, the impact would be very much less than you might expect, and the impact is largely a symbolic and political one, because the largest companies have already figured out how to reduce their tax rate to 15% or below. So Wall Street Journal was pointing out that there would be no hugely dramatic impact because of that. However, the repatriation of foreign-held profits would have an impact. Tim Cook, who is the CEO at Apple, Apple is holding offshore something like $213 billion at the moment. And Apple would be able to repatriate that money to the United States, pay whatever the tax reform package eventually comes to be, call it 10%, pay a 10% tax on that $213 billion, and then in its home U.S. operation have that enormous amount of capital repatriated and ready to spend on, in his words, growing the business and developing the business further in the United States. All of this is really chess playing. The system for the tax protective system that corporations have for shifting profits from one low tax location to another low tax location is famously and elaborately well developed by now, and has been developed over a matter of decades. So the major corporations will do what's best for them. That's their obligation to their shareholders. And the only way that the U.S. government is going to get to tax more of those profits and derive more tax revenue is by being the most advantageous piece of the puzzle. As long as those same corporations can borrow money at historically low levels, there's no powerful incentive to have the capital located one place or another. If you can borrow the money for 3% at home, then it doesn't give you a massive incentive to be able to pay cash. This is a tangled web. Here's the conclusion to it. This hit list of tax reforms is probably going nowhere. It's like a Christmas list for a long ago Republican named Newt Gingrich. It's kind of a Christmas list that he might have composed. And the list of changes would result in by various economists' estimates, these are Wall Street Journal economists, anywhere from $5 trillion to $10 trillion of loss of revenue over the next 10 years. It would have a profound impact on the governance of the country. 5 to 10 trillion loss of tax revenue. Now, whether additional revenue would be achieved elsewhere because the economy grows so wonderfully, that's another matter and for another time. The fundamental argument is that tax reform lower taxes for everybody would encourage greater economic growth, the so-called trickle-down theory, meaning that then trickling down everybody does better, and that the government does better too, because it gets more tax revenue because of a bigger, more boisterous economy. So the likelihood is that we're not going to see tax reform except in little bits and pieces, and we'll be back in the second segment for more detail.